I'm Dr. Dhanashree Jairam. I'm a senior assistant professor at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal University. I'm also co-coordinating the Center for Climate Studies at the university. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank ORF for inviting me to be a part of this forum. I would also like to welcome all the speakers here, some of whom I know pretty well for a long time, and some new faces as well. Pooja Vijay Ramamurthy, Associate Fellow, Center for Social and Economic Progress, New Delhi. Atul K. Thakur, Secretary, India Nepal Center, PhD CCI and Outreach Advisor, Asian Development Research Institute, Patna. Sargam Gupta, Assistant Professor at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, and Nimi Kurian, Professor, Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. So thank you so much for being here. So as we all know, this session is going to focus on many issues that were already to some extent flagged in many other sessions that were organized since morning and perhaps even yesterday. It's going to focus on India and its engagement with the Global South, and the issue of particularly championing equitable development. So whether it is about the issue of digital, what was discussed in some of the sessions this morning, technology, artificial intelligence, climate change, the previous session, in all of these, and also looking at some of the other critical issues like health, etc., we know that India has played a big role in terms of redefining what global governance means. So, there are a lot of efforts being made in terms of reforming global governance, but also about leveraging the different multilateral, minilateral, plurilateral forums that are already there, whether it's G20, which is something that, as within the presidency as well, how India tried to promote equity more than anything else. It hosted the Voice of the Global South Summit. And also it has done a lot of work in terms of crafting alternative models of development finance, and also looking at what are the ways in which we can help and also work with other developing countries in terms of resource mobilization for debt distress or promoting infrastructure projects, capacity building on a more even on a more even way, on a more just way and equitable manner in comparison to how it has been done so far, particularly by the countries of the global north. So I'm not going to take too much time. I would, first request our speakers to give their expertise, expert opinion on some of these topics, and they have a very diverse and very wide-ranging expertise. So I'm not going to pose certain, specific questions. I think it's better if, a broad range of ideas can be presented based on which we can have a discussion afterwards. Yeah, so over to you, Pooja. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dhanashree, and thank you ORF as well for having me here. I am actually not a Global South expert. I study more climate and energy, but I will try to make some comments for this panel which are relevant. So yesterday there was a comment made that this concept of Global South is something very fluid. It's not like there's any kind of committee of Global South and things like that. But the truth is, Global South is just a new word. It's just a politically correct word for words like the third world, developing country, etc. And none of these countries have also necessarily had a developing country committee, for example. So it's just a concept which has existed and just a new way to term it. What I would say is that India's strategy towards the Global South has changed since independence. So we have historically always been engaged with other countries, in their economic journeys, in their development journeys. But I think a lot of that was very anti-West and was kind of decolonization. I think we have moved past that, where now India is reached a stage where it is not anti-West, but it tries to navigate how it deals with the Global South, as well as trying to navigate its geopolitical relations with the West. And often if you see in a lot of newspapers, if you see the New York Times, etc., India is often thought to be a bridging power actually between the Global South and the West. And right now you can see that America has, stopped all its aid. A lot of countries are now going to struggle. And so now we need to understand, two things. Should India also follow the bandwagon and look more internally, domestically? Or should we seize this opportunity as one where we really go and seize the gap, where we try to then, aid a lot of these countries and help them where the traditional donors are not going? Well, I mean, this is something which is tricky because, first of all, while India wants to be the voice of the global summit, I think we need to understand that even today the amount of aid we give is 5 times less of China, and it is around 80 times less of what the US was doing previously. Of course, now things will change. But I think that's important to understand that we also have a limited capacity. We do not have an agency. You have, you have GIZ, which have offices all over the world. We do not have that. We have a diplomatic presence in around 140 countries. And out of that as well, you have missions where you have 2 or 3 people. How are they really going to carry out these large aid projects? So, while India can seize the gap, we have a lot of institutional capacity right now, which we need to improve for this to happen. But what we are doing and what is great is that we are actually using our sectoral strengths. So, rather than trying to compete, like, okay, China made DeepSeek, so we also go make, we don't have to do that. We already have a lot of sectoral strengths. We are good on agriculture, we're good on climate and AI, we're good in health. I mean, we give the world, I think, 1/3 of generic medicines is from here. So why don't we leverage our existing strengths? We are good in digitization as well, and kind of use this to be our outreach to the global south. And how can we do this, and what are we already doing? So one thing that we are doing, which has been really good, is we are working with agencies such as the United Nations. So there's a United Nations Office of South-South Cooperation. So India is working with them with a fund where we go, and we've helped around 80 countries set up projects, especially small island nations and LDCs. And when I was speaking to the chair of the UNOSSC from India at that point, he said that we reach countries like Cape Verde and countries that which we don't have any diplomatic presence, but we're able to do this. So I think existing in these partnerships is good. I don't think just because America is saying we want to go out of the UN that we also follow suit. We do not. I was hearing a lot of this. Okay, Donald Trump has gone out of the Paris Agreement. So what? He did so in the first time as well. He in his first term, he also got out of the Paris Agreement. But actually, let me tell you, the Republican states in that time of his 4 years had the highest wind and solar installation. So just, I don't think one necessarily leads to another. We need to actually, I think, be more like looking at what is the innovation that India can do in the next 10 years. Just because America is stepping out doesn't mean we necessarily do. And I think that is also a role that we can really play in the global south, is that when our traditional leaders, like America or Europe, when they step down, it is our chance to actually step up. And there's a lot of literature also in the political theory which states that when your traditional leaders are not having a moral imperative or are not stepping up, then actually is the time where countries like India can step up, and I think Nitin Pai was stating, shape the new global world order. We don't have to go backwards. We have to go forwards. And I think that's where we come in, going back to coal plants. The truth is our coal that we extract is not clean enough. We will be importing coal from Indonesia and Australia. So why do we want to go backwards just because another country is going backwards? I don't think, and that's where the stance can be of India and the global south. I mean, we have amazing examples. We have the International Solar Alliance, which is doing a great job. We have CDRI, which is the Coalition of Disaster resilient infrastructure, and I think we are doing really good sectoral work. While it might not be making news on Twitter like some other things, I think we are slowly making a grassroots impact in a lot of countries in the global south and really helping them with some of their key development needs. And I'll just wrap up with two important points. And I think one is this human-centric approach which we have taken. I think that needs to continue. We need to really focus on capacity building and institutional building in the global south, work on norms and standards. Last thing, we need to continue our stance of more a bottom-up approach and a needs-based approach than a top-down one. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, over to you, Atul, and maybe you can also talk to us about your own experience of working with Nepal and maybe broader South Asian region on some of these.
I'm much grateful to ORF for inviting me here, and this well curated and presented think tank forum. And the central theme of this summit, shaping a resilient global order, which is the need of power. I agree with Pooja when she said that it's a unfairly coined term. I mean, global south is not something which should be accepted, easily. First of all, nobody should be the expert of global south. It's somebody has just coined it. I mean, UNCTAD, if I'm not wrong, the idea came from UNCTAD, and based on the resource allocation, the segregation was just made because of the resources. No other criteria was chosen. So first, it is debatable whether it should be called global south, global north, and all these kind of things. Why not we should think about global commons? Or see, the world was always divided. It's not a new phenomenon, although the nomenclatures were different earlier. And as far as the equitable growth is concerned, see, when COVID struck, we all were thinking that China will see a great decoupling. It didn't happen. I come from industry and also from the intersection of think tank. Also, I'm a writer. I've recently authored this book, and this too somewhere deals with that developmental paradigm only, reclaiming India-Nepal relations, where we have put considerable amount of time and insights, reimagining the bilateral relations we have with Nepal. Nepal is just one example, it's a small example. But when you envision India as a champion of global south, which it is in any way, it's the hope for the world in today's time, no doubt about it. 47th President of the United States is going to give us hard time. He has started doing it. I'm coming from Nepal this morning. Only people are jittery. Those who have been heavily dependent on, aid from foreigners. We don't call it aid in India, fortunately. Our annual corpus is not less than, I think, $2 billion, about 17,500 crore rupees every year we spend through development partnership assistance. There is a separate wing inside Ministry of External Affairs. So India has been setting up an ideal for rest of the world, and that the rest of the world should emulate. When we sit in the forums like this, because ORF is a leading think tank, not just in India, but in the world also, the onus is on us to redefine a few loose terms, like global south, global north, while on the way I had chance to go through this beautiful concept note, wonderfully written. And I think most of the solutions have been given in these 4 or 5 pages. What we are talking, energy transition, then global, like climate finance and all. The world is unequal, what I'm trying to say. Since Bretton Woods to now, and again, you will see in another 50 years, the world will remain unequal. And for that matter, we need to shape our policy advocacy properly. Until unless we won't do that, the world is not going to be fairer. My third book, this is my fourth book. The third book was, and incidentally, it was named An Alternative Development Paradigm of Nepal, Finding an Alternative Development Paradigm of Nepal. So Nepal is just one context. And in the previous session, someone was saying, Nitinji, if I'm not wrong, he was saying that India is importing 80-90% of things which we consume. I don't think I agree with that. Nobody can agree on that because we don't have the data. Until unless we have that kind of data, then only we can discuss about the real asymmetry in import and export. Despite all the challenges, India as a country has succeeded in last 7 decades or so to at least make its people self-reliant. To an extent, we are self-reliant as a country. to an extent, because whenever we travel to smaller countries like Nepal and Bhutan and others, because neighborhood first is our priority, not just at national level, also at people-to-people level. Then we see and realize how far we have traveled since 1947. So I'm optimist. At the same time, I'm jittery also. The way the world is behaving now, the world is polarized, and machoism, nationalism, all kind of these things. Nationalism is not bad per se, but then what about the idea of multilateralism? Multilateral institutions have failed us during COVID time, but still they are failing us. But the problem is we have to rely on them still. So while I'm optimist, I'm also seeing the big challenges coming our way. Here I will stop.
Thank you. Sargam, with your expertise again on macroeconomics, and I think it would be good to understand what are the strengths that India can leverage when it comes to working with other developing countries, especially on the financial issue, some of which he also alluded to on the inequities that exist within the international system, but also within our own country, and which is something that affects many developing countries in terms of coming out of this debt distress, or the inequities that pervade the economies. So maybe you could talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhanashree. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of ORF for inviting me here. And like I share, to be very frank, my expertise area is monetary economics, and lately have been working on behavioral macro. But as a macroeconomist, I'll share my 2 cents from the thoughts I can gather from the discussions which have happened since yesterday, and my own general reading of these issues. So one thing which I have seen, especially yesterday during the panel sessions, is about a very greater optimism, and I think this term has been mentioned by almost has been mentioned in almost every panel, and we do see that there is a growing optimism about the current scenario and also about the optimism going forward. And I kind of share this optimism in moderation, but I do have my concerns about extreme optimism. So, like before I share a couple of points, why do I have some concerns? I just want to highlight a work. It's a very celebrated work, and it's by Manju Puri and David Robertson. So this paper came out in 2007. It's in Journal of Financial Economics, which is a finance top journal. And there the authors talk about how the optimism can influence the economic choices. So it's an empirical work where the authors conduct survey and they do empirical analysis. So one of the conclusions of the paper is that optimism in moderation does definitely improve the economic choices which are made by the agents. But as far as extreme optimism is concerned, it kind of evades it does not lead to a very prudent choices by the household, especially the agents. And the reason being that because of this extreme optimism, sometimes the agents, they get blinded or limited in receiving the signals which the economy is giving. And now going back to the my concerns, the first point which I want to raise is about the GDP. So my understanding of why we see India as a leader in the global south is because we are one of the world's largest economy in the top 5. Like we have the especially if you look at the aggregate GDP numbers. But looking at the GDP per capita, all right. So just to give you a benchmark, for the US, the GDP per capita number is 86,000 USD. And for China, let's say in the global south, it's around 12,000 USD. And for other countries in the global south itself, let's say Brazil, it's around 10 to 11,000 USD. For Argentina, it's 13,000, above 13,000 USD. And guess what? So India GDP per capita is? It's just 2,700 USD. So I think this puts India in a very unique position, right? And if we really want to catch up with a world where we want to, have the current GDP numbers or GDP per capita numbers, which the developed economies are sharing, and this is what the 2047 our dream is about. So for that, I believe we need not just growth, we need sustained growth for a long period of time. And this is what we have seen for the other countries also. So in order to get there, you have to have sustained growth. And let's see the recent numbers, especially from our macro picture. So till mid of September 2023, we were hitting growth rates above 8%, which were very good. But right within an year, like after 1 year, in the second quarter of 2024 and later, our growth slipped to 5.5% and then later 6%. So averaging to about 6.5% in 2023-2024. So now this basically questions how do we catch up, because our growth rates they are sluggish, and going forward we do not see any comeback, especially in the growth rates, anytime soon. So we need to think about how do we catch up there. And this takes me to the second point which I want to raise. It's about why the growth rates are sluggish. So there's a general consensus among the economists about the fall in the private investments in India, and this is happening despite the government's participation into infrastructural projects to just crowd in the private investment, but it has not really picked up. And the other thing which was coming up in the discussion was a slowdown of the growth rates, consumption growth rates, especially in the urban area. And they are fall in the wages as well, which is leading to the demand suppression. And I think this is the reason why recently we observed this very interesting changes in the tax relaxations in the budget. But onto that, my point is, so let's say, theoretically it can be argued that it may not lead to expansion in the consumption growth. So maybe we can talk about it later if I have time. But let's say it does, even after multiplier effect. So if you just look at the more statistics, so only 6.68% of people in our country actually, they file for taxes. It's not even they are paying, they just file for taxes. And much less percentage actually end up paying the taxes. So even if that channel is going to boost your demand, is it really sufficient? This is something which we really need to ask from a more macro perspective. And this next takes me to a more, an open economy approach. So let's say if we have a focus on a more export-led growth. So what we have seen recently. So what we have seen is still, again, in 2023, there was this growth rate, like high growth rates, which we observed above 8%. And it was complemented by a growth in the exports as well. But again, going to since quarter 2 2024, the growth rates, especially on the merchandise good exports, have fallen. They have been in negative. So, and there are. So I think in the first panel of the day, there was a discussion about what are the challenges which exporters are facing, especially on the credit constraints and the rising cost to them. So there's a rise in the borrowing cost which they are facing. And our import tariffs have been very high recently. So just to sum up what exactly where I'm getting to. So the idea is, in this change so there's a change in the global order. This is what I can see, like, from the recent discussions, and it has been really useful for me in making a, just place for like where I come from and what can we really think about, like how can we think about geopolitics playing a role into the whole economy of our country. So this change in the global order, the rise in the conflicts globally, and this basically means that there's a rise in the global, uncertainty. So given all these things, I think it's very important that going forward we, first of all, revise our objectives. We focus, like we have a long-term objective, and then we have a more short-term objectives, which will be more focusing on like priority subjects rather than just focusing on everything at the same time. Like we used to have a 5-year plan. So let's say the first 5-year plan in India focused more on the agriculture sector. Then the second was on the manufacturing sector. So I think I just want to close my comments by saying that we need more focused approach. And maybe we need to, the specialists in the geopolitics area, the trade area, and the economists, we all need to sit together and see what can we do going forward? What are the, like, definitely requires some major reforms in our country. We need to take some tough decisions going ahead. So what basically can be done? So can we reach out, something more feasible rather than just having discussions or on forums like this? It's very important that we come up with a solution, and which are more, I think, like, which looks good from at least macro perspective. Like, we should see all these things in the numbers, but we're not seeing anything in the aggregate numbers, actually. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that gives a good background to where India is positioned as far as, a leader of the global south or as a voice of the global south, and what role can India really play in that context, keeping in mind India's own economy and constraints and resources that it faces domestically. I think, Nimi, over to you. I think from there, you work a lot on China as well, and this is like another country that also positions itself as a voice of the global south, leader of the global south, and has invested a lot through the Belt and Road Initiative and, many other such, this like climate south-south cooperation, etc., which China has launched. Of course, on paper, there's a lot of debate over whether the money has indeed gone into the developing countries or not. But maybe you could also reflect a little bit on the, this global scenario, keeping in mind what is happening with Trump's axing of US aid. And of course, there are also these debates going on within Europe as well. German elections are coming up. And there is, of course, talk about, should we rethink what should be our development cooperation look like in the future? So in that sense, what can India do in terms of, positioning itself in this kind of geopolitical scenario?
Thanks, Dhanashree, and thank you. Let me also thank ORF for making this conversation possible. What I'll try and do, perhaps pick up some of the threads during Q&A, but as I listen to my three co-panelists, what I'll try and do today, I think, is to gather some of the threads from the conversation so far, and try and look at the ways in which India has contributed to the developmental arc of the global south, which is what was asked of us in this session. It's mentioned in the description and what we are supposed to engage or speak to. So I think three things broadly, three things really stand out for me when I look back at this long, historically, when I look back at India's engagement, normative engagement, I would say. And in that sense, I think I would concur a lot with what Bhuja and Atul mentioned about the need for a new vocabulary, and they're also coming from similar sensibilities. So essentially what I think first is, is this capacity to anticipate and invest in ideas ahead of their time. So there is, as I said, a very clear, right from the start, even this is predating independence itself, there's this very clear ideational focus and a push for the global south as a normative project, and not as a spatial, south of the equator, sort of very limited and a very, very simplistic understanding. It pushes back right from the beginning. And take, for instance, the way in which India, intellectually also in various forums, right from that start, goes on to problematize the liberal international order, and shines a light, as it were, on multiple modernities, and the idea that there are different pathways, imaginaries which are cosmopolitan and inclusive, such as Asianism, for instance. Secondly, I think what has also stood India in its a lot in its stead is a certain openness to ideational resets that opens up the scope for looking at both the global south and the global north as dynamic categories that are mutually really constitutive of each other and not as adversarial, again, very simplistic, binaries. And this is perhaps what the External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, meant when he said, quote unquote, the idea of the West as the bad guy is passé. So thirdly, I would say, even when it pushed for the idea or showed a certain openness to ideational resets, there was this understanding of emphasizing a broad sense of unity of experience that in a sense defines Southern multilateralism. So, which beyond the Bandungs and the NAMs, you have this certain understanding of and a certain empathy and an engagement with and an alignment with what I would say beyond the high table, what has been called as non-alignment from below. So there are these, India is actively engaged in, has been actively engaged in networks like the Pan-Asian Congresses of 1927 and 1928. You have the Afro-Asian People's Solidarity Organizations. So long story short, what you essentially see is ideationally the capacity to, India's capacity to move the needle, as it were, from what I would call a last mile approach, which places people at the end of the policy process, towards a first mile approach, which essentially places them front and center of the design process. And you see this reflected in the way India has actively supported principles such as leave no one behind, which essentially is at the center of the 2030 UN SDGs, and the idea of the People's G20. So I'll just take a couple of examples, illustrative examples from healthcare, because the session mentioned a bunch of focus areas. So in healthcare, for instance, where I see India playing, and may I borrow, Pooja, your usage of the bridging role, I see India playing two simultaneous consecutive roles. One is that of a bridging role, and the other is a convening role. The bridging role essentially is the capacity, and this is a multi-scalar, sort of, I would say it intersects at the global, the regional, and the national levels, and each of these would intersect closely. And I'm taking just an illustrative example in healthcare as a public good and a regional public good, and a public health and as global health, both. So when you look at the way, with the pandemic and the as a backdrop, South Asia has been conspicuously absent from any number of disease surveillance networks that connect other parts of the world. For instance, the CORDS, which is the connecting organization for regional disease surveillance, which connect regional networks in Asia, Africa, and Europe. And South Asia is conspicuously absent from this, and this is where I think India's bridging role can come to connect these to these platforms, which is critical for capacity building. Similarly, is the regional capacity building, potential to build, which is where the convening capacity comes, to build capacity within the region, within South Asia, and where there's a very interesting early template in 2003 within South Asia when the SARS virus breaks out. At that point, the health ministers from the SAARC countries convene in Male and bring out, the Male Declaration and put together nuts and bolts of, what should be the response, collective regional, sort of template in terms of, and they figure out screening procedures, quarantine rules, and so on and so forth. So there's a very interesting early example to build on. And nationally, I think I would end with this, is to similar set to, potential to build on capacity. And there's this very interesting, if news that I read a couple of years ago, India, I think, the ICMR has produced the first ever, in South Asia, for instance, the first ever, it's a mobile laboratory, but it is for early detection and diagnosis of all sorts of infectious diseases, pandemics. And the focus of this essentially is to make these available, accessible to remote areas and locations. And this has been, I think, inaugurated in parts of the Northeast, in Kohima recently. So long story short, I would say it's some of these intersections that India can play both a bridging and a convening role. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Pooja, just to get back to you on some of the points that you mentioned, you work on climate, so maybe I'll just ask you a question on climate specifically, because you have worked a lot on triangular partnerships, for instance, as an alternative sort of pathway towards generating climate finance and technology cooperation, capacity building, etc. And especially in the backdrop of, of course, Trump's withdrawal is one, but also the Baku summit pandemonium that happened with climate finance and not enough finance being generated. Again, Indian delegation was the one that pointed it out specifically. So moving forward, what are these alternative pathways that you are looking at, in terms of, of course, we need to look beyond the COP summits and UNFCCC and, all of that. So maybe you can reflect a little bit on that. And Atul, especially on the point of South Asia, what Nimi mentioned, I think you can talk about some of these, projects and everything, connectivity, healthcare, infrastructure, again, issues that are at the heart of India's development cooperation with South Asian countries. I think that would be interesting as well. And then we'll open it up for questions after that. Yeah.
I'll just take up a minute. Yes, so I think if you see, India is already trying to create a more inclusive multilateralism with the International Solar Alliance, with CDRI, with the Global Biofuel Alliance, and the big cat. So, and if you notice, what's really interesting is out of these 4 new multilaterals, climate is of 3 of them. So when, as I said earlier, when the global north kind of backs off from climate, but the truth is that especially LDCs and SIDS, they need climate resilience. They don't necessarily need the most cutting edge advanced tech. What they need is innovation for their basic development problems. As Nimi said, if you're going to create this mobile lab for health, that itself is much more valuable than going and giving them the most important chat GPT or AI, because what we don't realize is a lot of global south countries, or actually even countries in the global north, the amount of poverty that I saw in the US, are still dealing with a lot of developmental problems. It's not only about most cutting edge AI. And I think that's where India can really come in, because especially in the climate space, we have so many private startups and tech that do things like AI for climate agriculture, that goes and tells farmers about what is happening with the environment, because they can plan their use accordingly. We have also in the climate resilience space, I mean, within our region, because of our satellites and all those things, we provide a lot of information on early warning systems for disaster management. So, there are so many things that we can do through our own multilaterals. And of course, as you mentioned, triangular, which is my forte. We should be working with the countries that are more friendly with us to work in the global south as well, but a little bit on our terms as well, on our norms and standards, as opposed to kind of Western mandated ideas of this. But I will go back that yes, with the climate finance corp, these are all tricky situations, but even today, our renewable energy transition has been public domestic funding which is really pushed. It is not like international finance is what has led to our amazing achievements. It has been domestic finance and private, and I mean both private and the state. So at the end of the day, yes, these are normative arguments. These are sad that the world is going in that way, but we still need to focus on building our own institutional capacity. As Nimi said, we need to look at 10 years down the line, what is going to be the conversation, not right now, and work towards building institutional capacity towards that. And my feeling is, even if the world is in flux, that 10 years down the line is not to go backwards, but to actually be an innovator on a lot of these fronts.
Thank you, Dr. Jairam. I duly acknowledge the broad sweeps from Professor Kurian and Dr. Gupta. Both have really covered the ground. Dr. Gupta has rightly said that investment has been not coming up the way we have been expecting in India. But look at it little differently. In last 20 years, especially even let's go a little far, since 1991, the year we opened up our economy, most of the big business houses in India had started looking at India as a green suit. I will give you one humbling example of Nepal. All the major investments in that country from India happened in 90s, most of them, and few of them in 70s. Not much had happened in 80s, not much had happened in last 10, 15 years, except the investments channelized through Government of India's public sector units and a few banks which entered into collaboration there and are really doing wonderful. In bullet points, I would like to mention a few things which I view that these are important. First, that India's development partnership agenda has been hit. It has been a major success. It has been helpful in changing the perceptions towards India because we live in a very challenged, neighborhood. We have Nepal, a very small country, not small in size or diversity, but in terms of population or industrial advancement. We have Bhutan, which is happy the way it is. It has been, and it is going to be. Then Bangladesh is a new, area of despair for us. Afghanistan has been always challenging since time immemorial. If you look at the migration of all the invaders, always it happened through northwest frontiers. Then Sri Lanka is going nowhere. Maldives is going another direction. So India's position is not that suitable as a superpower. But we should have some sense of pride in achieving what we have achieved, despite all the challenges. And while we are talking about championing equitable growth, we can't limit it to global south because I already said it in a start that global south is a kind of misnomer. It's something which is limiting us as a power or as an aspiring, whatever, Vishwaguru, or whatever you say that we want to do something in the world. We have been doing, in fact. All the major ideas you see in the last century, be it the United Nations or any formation, India was there. It's a separate thing that we couldn't get a permanent, seat in United Nations Security Council, and so many other times we lacked the zeal or bargaining power which we supposed to have. But I think India is moving into a right direction. Projects like BRI, which is a kind of colonial, outreach by China. China has a huge pull effect. You like it or not like it, as a country we will never like it. But we have to acknowledge that China has a pull effect, no doubt about it. But China is also surrounded with so many problems. It is facing more problems than we are facing as a country. We have a robust democratic system here, and we should celebrate that. No matter who is ruling the roost, but that person can be changed here. The beauty we have here, China doesn't have that luxury. So as an Indian, I'm hopeful, and I'm sure that India has a greater pie in the changing world order. The world is in flux. It will be in flux, but we have to sense the opportunities coming our way. We have to tap that.
Okay, so we have around 15 minutes for Q&A. So if If there are any questions, I see one hand up there. Yeah.
So, my name is Parul, and I have a question that how do you see the need for the inclusion of gender subjective perspective while managing and working on these sustainable development agendas, policies, and politics? Because in the developmental hierarchy, most of the time there are dominant gender perspective and practices who are leading all these agendas, policies, and politics. And some particular subjects are working at the grassroots level, especially the developing area like South Asia. So, how do you see it?
Okay.
Thank you. I can pass the mic first there.
No, it's fine. You can go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Hi. Good evening, everyone. I'm Irishika. I am the director of Organization for Research on China and Asia. And I had a question for Professor Kurian. But of course, anybody on the panel is welcome to answer. You spoke about the Global South as a normative idea and how India's openness to ideational resets is an advantage here. I was just wondering how you see India's increasing global influence and willingness to challenge sort of traditional North-South dichotomies creates opportunities for ideational resets within the Global South itself.
Yeah. Over there. We'll take 3 questions and then another round.
Poonam Dabas for representing Center for Media and Strategic Studies. My question is specifically to Sargam. You said looking at the macroeconomic parameters, 8% growth. Where did we get these figures from? Because both IMF and the World Bank twice revised the figures which they had given, and at no point of time it was 8%. Yes, India was claiming we are 8%, 8.5%. We also tapered it down. So what is the source of 8%?
One question.
Yeah, I'm Pradeep Mehta, head of CUTS International. A 40-year-old NGO working on a bandwidth of issues.
Yes.
Now, I think the point raised about Global South being amorphous, or is there anything like, I think we continuously harp upon Global South, and this was mentioned even in earlier sessions, that is there an entity like that or something like that. What I found missing was that we have an entity called G77 in China, which has a secretariat also in New York. And people tend to ignore that or just forget it. I don't know why. I think let us revisit those institutions which are there. Secondly, another institution which is developing as a part of the Global South is the BRICS. Now that is also expanding. So there are institutions, instead of feeling that Global South is an amorphous institution, it is not so. If you look at the existing institutions and use them, and then many of the G77 projects are running on many of these issues that we are discussing, except that they may not be as, India doesn't take it as seriously as the other countries in the third world do. And that is a point which I would request you to take note of. Thank you.
Thank you. If you can keep your responses to 2 minutes each, that would be great. If you want to start, maybe in the reverse order, yeah. Maybe you can start, yeah.
Your question about gender, point well taken, and if I may just share that the Pan-Asian, so part of the problem could be if you are looking only at the official and the formal, right? When it's true, there is a lot of blind spots there, tremendous amount of gap to be, ground to be covered, but the good part of the story is that if you were to also look beyond the high table, as I said, and look at, for instance, this rich corpus of intellectual and essentially the intellectual investment in the idea of a broad-based understanding of the South, and that intersects with Ishika's question as well. You have some of those going back to the Pan-Asian Congresses of 1927 and 28 incidentally had a lot of focus on gender. So some of the reasons why we are unable to see is also because we are looking at the wrong place. So this does not mean that the problem is going to be there's a silver bullet solution, but some of those there are these counter narratives that are there that push back against a sort of, I can recall at this point it'll be great to actually remember the caution that the Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie said about quote unquote the dangers of the single story. So if we were to look at the global south as a single story, we will run against many of these, sort of unidimensional readings. And so to you, Irshika, I would say, just as a segue to what I said to her, is that I'm not surprised, definitely, but of course, the ideational resets, I'm not sure about the appetite, because that will be there in many of the countries of the South, including India and China, because but the point remains that there's the notion of the South, the notion of the North is changing, has changed, and you're looking at what I'll call changing, what I mentioned in one of my presentations recently, as the changing geographies of voice. And so there'll be multiple Norths in the South, just as much there'll be many Souths in the North. So, and these are not going to be we should have a very de-romanticized understanding about how far ideational resets can take us, because the appetite may just not be there. Thank you.
So your point about 8% growth rate. So what I was quoting was straight from the government website. So this is a real GVA growth rate, which is this is. Okay. So
actual rate is 6.7%, if I am not wrong.
So this is financial year 2000.
But in the past, India.
No, so I just to 2023, 2024. So 8.2% on the website. So what I'm trying to say is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I
There may
just
be
complete?
slight variation.
Can I just complete?
Amount of variation.
Can I just complete?
Yeah, ma'am, please.
So what I'm trying to say.
I think we should allow her.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
So what I'm trying to say, so these are just the government estimates. You can just Google and find them on the government website. And of course, like I think recently there have been a lot of debate on the calculations and how these numbers are being compiled. So when I'm comparing 8% so this is financial year 2003 and 4 revised estimates on the government website, and 6.4 revised estimate for 2004-2005 financial year. This is for the 1 year ahead. And the idea is, let's say even if we take 8.2% on the face of it, okay, let's forget the debate about it. So next year, going forward, the government will use the same methodology. They would not have changed the methodology, right? And even if they would change the methodology, they would not do it the other way around. Why would they show the growth rates going down? So I'm saying even if let's say methodology, there's a flaws in the methodology, which we can have debates beyond this forum. Even if you use the same methodology, there is a downgrade in the growth rate. So this is very concerning. So the idea is the government is trying to show the maximum numbers it can. And even then the growth seems very sluggish. And this is very concerning. That was the idea of just putting these numbers down.
So you're talking of estimates, but 23
estimates.
is long gone.
Estimated
We would have come to
Estimated
the final
Yeah,
figures.
exactly. Estimate.
So we'll have the final one
And the
later
contraction
on.
has to be provisioned as well.
Yes.
Right?
Can we have this
While
discussion?
ascertaining the real growth,
outside.
contraction
Yeah.
has to be provisioned. So she's right in her
So can I just
presentation.
add one more thing?
Okay, sure.
So you mentioned about the other aspects like healthcare and education. So I just want to quickly make one point. So all these inclusive, agendas, be it within the country and across the country. Let's say if we want to really help the other poor nations within the global south, I think practically if we just see, it all requires funds. So given that government deficit, we are planning to reduce the government deficit, and there have been announcement of tax reductions. We don't. Where's the fiscal space to do all those things? So we really have to prioritize and see what works, what doesn't work. I think one of the panelists was also mentioning about that. So what are our strengths? So I think all these things need to be driven by what the academics is saying. So we have hundreds of the policy currently in place. So do we really need all those things? Let's see what is working, what is not working, and then prioritize what we really need and what is our strength. So just to
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. there was a question about gender representation, gender sensitization, I think. She's not here. There's a wonderful question. The idea of sustainability, which I think derived from the old idea of sustainable development. As sir has said that many things happened in the past and the wisdom doesn't lie in forgetting all of them. There was an idea of 18th century once upon a time. So many things preceded before we entered into the space of debating all these things intellectually. G77 was a wonderful formation, I think. And it was, yeah, it should exist. It should exist and should thrive. Because global south is not something which we should cherish, which we should afford anyway. This is a kind of plot, plotting something which can instill inferiority complex in all of us. And then the cases of China, India, and LDC countries, we have huge diversities, even income-wise. One of the laughable criteria which was used to classify as a global south is lifestyle. So there can be endless debate on the whole idea. But I would like to say that fair gender representation is must for even thinking about sustainable development.
Yeah, I just want to add in this whole China-India comment which came is that India needs to stop positioning itself as an alternative to China, whether it's the global south or the global north. We're not going to gain anything. And now if Trump goes and becomes best friends with Xi Jinping, then India's going to lose out on that. And it's the same in the global south. We need to always stop posturing ourselves as compared to China. Why don't we build a global south identity of our own as we had in the past? And why don't we stand out with our sectoral strengths, our shared values, democracy was mentioned, what we are strong in, as opposed to constantly being India versus China, because honestly that is also kind of a global north dichotomy which has been made of us. And I think we ourselves as Indians need to move out of always positioning ourselves in this comparative way.
The most glaring dichotomy is China still exists to be our largest trading partner, despite all the problems we have. So there is no reason we should always see everything in comparison. We have our own, credential and stature as a country.
Thank you. We have only 3 minutes left, so I'm not going to take any more questions because there won't be enough time to address them. Hopefully, you can take them up with the speakers after the session. So, thank you so much to the speakers for for addressing all the questions that were there in the concept note and also answering all the questions that were posed by the audience. And I think as some of the, of course, what speakers mentioned and also from the audience, what we heard about, I think one of the questions is about the so-called global reforms, institutional reforms, and what was mentioned as G77, BRICS, and so many other institutions have now come up within the so-called global south or global majority, or, there are so many nomenclatures that are being used to represent the so-called global south. So in that sense, with all these institutions coming up, are they going to really reform the global order in a way that, the global order becomes more equitable and just is a, continues to be a question mark that we need to, explore. So thank you so much. And I hope that, you will enjoy the rest of the sessions afterwards. Thank you.